Ever catch yourself like thinking back to your school days and kind of wondering, why was it like that? Why were we grouped by age and shuffled between subjects on this like strict timetable?
Yeah, it's a pretty universal experience, right? We all went through it, but
But maybe never really stopped to think about the why behind it all. So today we're going to do a deep dive into that, unpacking how schools organize learning and how that's changed over time.
sounds fascinating. Where are we starting?
Our main source is this chapter from an education textbook. It's all about curriculum, how it's developed and implemented, and gets into some really interesting stuff about the different models schools have used over the years.
I'm guessing it's not as simple as just deciding what kids should learn, right?
Definitely not. Right off the bat, the chapter makes it clear that curriculum isn't created in a vacuum. There are all these actors at play.
Like what?
Well, think about it. You've got local traditions, right? Certain ways of doing things that have been around for ages.
Makes sense.
Then you got state guidelines, those mandates everyone has to follow.
Ah, so there's a level of standardization too.
Exactly. And then on top of that, you've got to make sure that schools within the same district are all on the same page.
Oh, yeah. So there's a need for consistency across the board. That's a lot to juggle.
It is. It's like no blank slate for educators.
More like a puzzle with a bunch of preset pieces.
I like that. A puzzle.
Oh,
Okay, so let's start with a system most of us went through elementary school, the good old graded school model.
yes. First grade, second grade, and so on. Seems straightforward enough, but I'm sure there's more to the story.
Oh, absolutely. So the graded school, as we know it, really started gaining traction back in the mid-1800s.
Interesting. What was the driving force behind that?
Well, this was during a period where people were really obsessed with measuring everything in education, kind of like a measurement movement, if you will.
Standardized tests come to mind.
Yeah, that's like a modern version of this. The idea back then was to track progress very specifically. Are kids achieving what they should be by a certain age?
So that led to the whole concept of reaching specific learning goals by the end of each grade.
Exactly. And from that, we get the idea of syllabi, those detailed course outlines, and even like state-level content standards. What should be taught in each grade,
It's all about neatly packaging learning into grade-sized boxes, huh?
basically.
Yeah,
But as you can imagine, not everyone was thrilled with this rigid structure.
right. I can see how it would feel a little too factory-like, just churning out students all molded to the same standard.
Exactly. And that's where the progressive education movement comes in. Figures like John Dewey and Junius Merriam pushing for something very different.
Ah, yes, the activity curriculum. I've heard of this. Much more hands-on, right?
Totally. It was all about shifting away from rote learning and embracing real-world applications.
So instead of just memorizing historical dates, imagine kids recreating a historical event through role-playing.
Or building models to understand scientific concepts. Love it.
It definitely sounds more engaging.
But the big question is, how did it actually play out in schools? Did they really ditch the textbooks and embrace this whole free-flowing approach?
Well, like with any big change, there were definitely successes and challenges.
I can imagine.
I mean, the activity curriculum did bring about some lasting changes, the focus on student-centered learning.
Oh, yeah. Making things relevant to kids' lives.
Exactly. But implementing such a flexible model was tough.
Yeah. I bet there were concerns about whether students were still learning the basics.
Absolutely. Always that balancing act, right? You want to foster creativity and deeper understanding, but also got to ensure kids are building a solid foundation of knowledge.
Right. It's like walking a tightrope. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Our textbook also talks about the non-graded elementary school.
Non-graded, like no more first grade, second grade. How does that even work?
You got it. Ditching the traditional grade levels altogether. The idea is that students progress at their own pace based on mastery of concepts.
So you could have like a gifted 8-year-old doing advanced math alongside a 10-year-old who's still working on the basics.
Exactly.
Wow. I can see the appeal for parents wanting a more personalized experience, but logistically.
I know, right? How do you even assess progress in that kind of system?
Plus, making sure everyone's getting the support they need.
It's a trade-off, more flexibility, but also way more complex for teachers.
Definitely. Speaking of things that sounded good in theory but were tough in reality.
Remember open classrooms?
Oh, yeah. The textbook described those huge open spaces where tons of kids would be working on different activities at the same time.
Organized chaos is what comes to mind.
Total sensory overload.
It was supposed to promote collaboration and student-led learning.
But I bet it was hard for teachers to give individual attention in that environment.
Oh, for sure. And forget about controlling the noise level.
So it's not surprising this model kind of fell out of favor.
It did. But it did teach us some valuable lessons.
Like what? About the importance of striking a balance between stimulating environments and maintaining some structure and order.
Right. It's about finding that sweet spot. Okay, so we've talked about elementary school.
Yeah.
What about when we move beyond that? What happens in the world of junior high and middle school?
That's where things get really interesting. We start to see how shifting views of adolescence really influenced how schools are structured.
Oh, I'm ready for it. Let's dive in.
So junior high, right? When we think about it, most of us probably picture something pretty similar to high school, just with younger students, you know?
Yeah, totally. Different teachers for each subject, that whole focus on academics.
Exactly, and that's kind of how it evolved over time. But originally, junior high was actually envisioned as more of a bridge.
A bridge.
Yeah, between elementary school and high school, like a place for early adolescents to kind of explore a range of subjects and discover their passions.
So it wasn't so much about like drilling down into specific academic disciplines, but more about providing a broader experience.
Exactly. It was meant to be more exploratory. Remember, this is a time of massive change for young people. They're figuring out who they are, what they're good at, what interests them.
All that good stuff.
Right. So the early junior high model was designed to support that, you know, offering a taste of different fields, fostering a love of learning.
It's like a more holistic approach to education then, right?
Yeah.
Recognizing that it's not just about academics.
Exactly. But as we often see in education, the pendulum swings back and forth.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
So over time, junior highs started to resemble senior high schoolers more.
More emphasis on grades and test scores.
Yeah. Departmentalized courses, stricter schedules, heavier focus on academic performance, that whole thing.
I guess that makes sense in a way, given the pressure to prepare students for college and all that. But was something lost in that shift away from exploration?
It's a good question. And it's one that a lot of educators are still grappling with today. You know, did the move away from that exploratory nature of early junior high limit opportunities for students to develop a wider range of skills and interests?
Right. It's that classic tension between breadth and depth in education, finding the right balance.
Exactly. Speaking of balance, our textbook highlights a particular approach that emerged during this junior high era, the core curriculum.
Oh, yeah, the core class. I've always been curious about that. What exactly does it mean?
So, in its ideal form, the core curriculum aims to integrate different subjects, like English and social studies, around common themes or problems.
Instead of treating them as totally separate.
Right, it's about weaving them together, showing students how different areas of knowledge connect and inform each other.
So instead of having a separate English class and a separate history class, you might have a combined core class that explores, say, the American Revolution through literature and primary source documents.
Exactly. And the focus is often on problem solving and critical thinking, applying knowledge to real-world situations.
So it's not just memorizing facts, but actually doing something with them.
Right. Analyzing, synthesizing, making connections.
That sounds pretty ambitious. Did schools actually manage to pull it off effectively?
Well, the implementation has been pretty varied, honestly. Some schools have done an amazing job, you know, creating truly interdisciplinary experiences for students. But others have struggled to break down those traditional subject matter boundaries.
And it ends up just feeling like separate subjects taught in the same room.
Unfortunately, sometimes, yeah.
I bet it takes a real shift in mindset for teachers to embrace this kind of integrated approach, too.
Absolutely. You have to be willing to step outside your subject matter comfort zone and really collaborate with colleagues.
Which isn't always easy.
Definitely not. But when it's done well, it can be so powerful.
Okay, so we've gone from this more general, exploratory junior high model to a more academic, subject-focused one. What happens next in our educational journey?
Well, we come to the emergence of middle schools, which have basically replaced junior highs in a lot of districts.
Middle school. Middle school. Everyone has such vivid memories of that time.
For better or for worse, right.
Exactly. So was this shift just a name change, or was there a bigger philosophical shift going on?
It was definitely more than just a name change. The shift to middle schools represents this growing recognition of the unique developmental needs of pre-adolescence.
Because it's such a time of rapid change, right?
It really is. Physically, socially, emotionally, and intellectually, it's all happening at once. And middle schoolers are designed to address all of these needs, not just the academic ones.
So it's less about treating them like mini high schoolers and more about creating an environment that's really tailored to this age group.
Precisely. Middle schoolers often emphasize things like advisory programs, where students have a dedicated teacher to guide them through all the social and emotional stuff.
Oh, yeah, like a mentor.
Exactly. And then there's team teaching, where teachers from different disciplines collaborate.
To create those more integrated learning experiences we were talking about.
Exactly. And then you've got exploratory electives, allowing students to sample different areas of interest.
Like everything from coding to creative writing to woodworking, that kind of thing.
Yep. It's about recognizing that kids this age are more than just brains soaking up information. They're also developing their social skills, their emotional intelligence, their sense of self.
It's a much more well-rounded approach to education. Now, I'm curious, as we move on to our final stop on this educational journey, the senior high school, do we see these ideas about developmental appropriateness and the balance between specialization and exploration continue?
That's a great question. And the answer is it's complicated. High school definitely has its own unique set of challenges and opportunities, but we'll dive into all of that after the break.
Okay, so high school. We can't really talk about modern education without talking about standardized testing. Those high-stakes exams, accountability movements like No Child Left Behind.
Yeah, it's had a huge impact on high schools, for sure.
It feels like a bit of a double-edged sword, to be honest.
In what way?
Well, on the one hand, there's been this push for greater accountability, transparency in education, right?
Which is a good thing, right?
Yeah. Parents and communities want to know how their schools are performing or students getting a good education.
Makes sense.
But I've also heard concerns that this intense focus on testing has led to a narrowing of the curriculum.
Oh, yeah, where schools prioritize the subjects that are tested and kind of neglect other important areas.
Exactly. Like we're sacrificing a well-rounded education in pursuit of higher test scores.
It's a valid concern. When schools are pressured to raise those scores, it can create this teach to the test mentality.
Right. Where the focus shifts away from deep understanding, critical thinking, and toward rote memorization, test-taking strategies.
Exactly. And then it raises those bigger questions about the purpose of education,
Like, are we just trying to produce students who are good at taking tests, or are we trying to develop well-rounded individuals who can actually, think critically, be creative?
Right. Are they prepared to tackle the complex challenges of the 21st century? It's a big question.
It is. And speaking of different approaches to education, our textbook also mentions the rise of alternative options like voucher programs, charter schools.
Yeah, those have definitely shaken things up.
How have those choices impacted the traditional public school system, would you say?
Well, it's created a more competitive landscape, that's for sure. The whole idea behind vouchers and charter schools is to give parents more control
over their kids' education.
Right. And in theory, this increased competition should lead to innovation and improvement across all schools.
Because they have to try to attract and retain students.
Exactly.
So it's kind of like introducing a free market element into the education system.
You could say that, but of course it's complicated.
Oh, I bet.
There are strong arguments on all sides. Some folks argue that vouchers and charter schools drain resources from public schools,
Especially those that are already struggling.
Yeah, which further exacerbates inequalities.
But others say that these options provide much-needed alternatives for families who are dissatisfied with their assigned public schools.
Right, and that's especially true in underserved communities.
So it sounds like the debate really comes down to how we view the role of government in education. Like,
Right.
Does a more market-driven approach actually benefit all students?
It's a tough question, and at the end of the day, it's a reminder that there's no one-size-fits-all solution, right?
For sure. Different communities have different needs, different preferences.
And a truly effective system needs to be flexible, responsive to that diversity.
Absolutely. So, as we wrap up here, as we look to the future of education, any thoughts on where things are headed?
Ooh, that's a big one. It's hard to say for sure, but I think we're going to continue to see this push for more personalized learning.
Driven by technology, I imagine.
For sure. And this growing recognition that students learn in different ways and at different paces.
It's exciting to think about the possibilities, but also, kind of daunting to think about the challenges.
It is. What's in the biggest takeaway for you from all this?
I think the biggest takeaway for me is just how much education is constantly evolving.
It's not static at all.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It's this dynamic system,
Yeah.
shaped by social trends, political movements, tech advancements.
Even architectural fads?
Haha,
Yeah.
exactly. So, yeah, there's no single right way to organize learning. What works in one context might not work in another. The key is to just be adaptable, responsive, and always focus on what's best for the students.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And I think that's a great place to leave our listeners. What do you think?
I agree. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into curriculum organization. It's been a fascinating journey.
It really has. Always a pleasure to explore these topics with you.
Likewise. And to our listeners, we'll be back next time with another deep dive. Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep exploring.